Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, a historic moment in Evanston as the city determines who will be the first to receive reparations. We speak with two people behind the push to make it happen. A new exhibit at the DuSable Museum explores civil rights era murderers of the past to offer lessons for a brighter future. The author of an urban fantasy series shares why she wanted to bring more diversity to children's books.
The craft beer community it's one of those communities, there's literally something for everyone.
And meet a Chicago brewer hoping to make the craft beer industry more inclusive, one drink at a time. First off tonight, Evanston has selected the first group of Black residents to receive reparations through the city's Restorative housing program. The program will distribute $10 million over 10 years using tax revenue from recreational marijuana sales. Each recipient may receive $25,000 in housing benefits that can be used towards a down payment, home repairs, or interest or late penalties. The first 16 recipients were chosen at random last week. They're among a total of 122 Black residents approved for reparations so far. Joining us now with more are Peter Braithwaite, an Evanston City Council member and chair of the Reparations Committee, and Robin Brew Simmons, a former Evanston City Council member who led the effort to create this initiative. She still sits on the Reparations Committee. And Peter and Robin, thanks to you both for joining us. Robin, let's start with you, please. Why make reparations in the form of housing benefits?
Well, thank you for the question. We went through a process that was informed by our Black community stakeholders in 2019, weighed in on what priorities and remedies we would like to see as a community for reparations. And as consensus, we ended up prioritizing housing. It's important to note there were dozens of recommendations. And in addition to that, our case for reparations in Evanston, which is available at the city's website, is largely found in our housing law, our zoning policy and housing policy that were anti-Black and discriminating, stripped away wealth and opportunity from Black residents between 1919 and 1969 before fair housing was passed. And so we can begin to measure the damage. We can physically still see the racial segregation in our community, and housing will allow wealth building. Families build wealth through housing equity, no matter their race.
And Peter Braithwaite, what are the next steps for these first 16 recipients in the Ancestor category?
Thank you very much for that question as well. So what we've been doing over the last week or so since we've met, we are notifying all of our ancestors that have submitted their applications. The next step after that, we are going to do the verification. So many of the ancestors, because it was an online process, we've identified the fact that family members, people in the community help to upload their information. So we want to qualify, ensure that they are who they are through a very simple process. The next step is we want them to accept the first repair. And they'll have three options. They'll have the ability to do home repair, which seems to be the popular one. In addition to that, they can use the funds to pay down their mortgage. And for those that choose, they can also use it towards purchasing a home.
And why a random selection for this first group of 16, and why 16? Councilmember Braithwaite, back to you.
Yeah, no, great question. And so, you know, within this process, there's so many things that we have to do, not only to educate our community, but we just wanted a fair, transparent process that didn't penalize someone based on when they submitted their application. I think the good thing in Alderman Simmons, as well as some other committees, it was in plain sight. We didn't use anything that was computer generated, and we felt that that was just part of a fair process. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so this has been a 2-year process, the entire thing, since the Evanston City Council adopted the resolution to establish a reparations fund and subcommittee back in 2019. Robin Simmons, you reflected on that journey during a moment during last week's name drawing. Here's a little bit of that.
We are prioritizing our residents that suffered direct harm. Black residents that lived in Evanston, between 1919 and 1969, and suffered from discriminating zoning laws that stripped away wealth and opportunity.
So Robin, it was an emotional moment for you. How does it feel for you to see this initiative that you advocated for come to fruition?
I am encouraged in this bold step that we've taken as a city, that we can build on this, knowing that we have more work ahead of us than we have completed, but we have now set a standard. There is a precedent. There is a model, an example in which we can build on, increasing the fund, expanding the benefits, collaborating with more partners and institutions to increase repair throughout our city. And it feels very good that our city has inspired the nation to begin to look at reparations from municipalities and state harm.
Councilmember Braithwaite, some people have criticized this plan, saying that, the reparations should come in the form of direct cash payments rather than, being paid to the banks for financing what's needed for homes. How do you respond to that?
So I'll defer back to what Alderman Simmons said, which a lot of the communication and conversations that we've had and we've received from our residents, it was all around housing. And we realized that so much of the federal harm, when you look at the history of our country, it took place in terms of two things that we weren't able to participate in. That was the GI Bill that guaranteed education, as well as first-time home buyers that programs that we weren't able to benefit from. So we look at past legislation where we saw specific harm that came to our Black community. And based on so many of the conversations that Alderman Simmons had, we felt that that was important. In addition to that, through the work of Alderman Simmons and also Dino Robinson, who is our local Black historian through Shorefront, that's how we were able to define and prove the harm committed against our local government and other agencies. So it just made sense. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, and I did want to ask Alderman Simmons a similar question. What other forms of reparation could there be beyond housing assistance?
Well, we look at full repair, including cessation. And so one of the things we'll need to do over time is address our policies that still have racism baked in it. And so that's not even a form of compensation. That's guarantee or non-repetition. Satisfaction, which is what we see most of all. Monuments and street namings and culturally relevant art, honoring our history as well. Restitution and compensation is usually what is brought up most, but it could be in the form of, we're gonna get to business. That's in Resolution 126 R19, economic development and educational initiatives as well. And our residents made recommendations, including free tuition and business grants and access to trauma care and healthcare access, and the list went on and on. And so our hope is that we're not looking at the municipal government alone, but we're looking at institutions around the city and this nation for them to do their part, healthcare systems, education systems, private business, and other industries that also were anti-Black and harmed the Black community over generations.
And Alderman Braithwaite, before we let you go, we've got about 20 seconds, but you were first offering reparations to the people you call the ancestors. Do you feel pressure to get this right?
Yes, we do. Based on the harm, historic harm to our people, as well when we look at this subset of group within just past November. I think we closed the application process November 5th. We actually lost three ancestors during that period of time. So I can tell you myself, I call her the Ambassador Simmons, as well as the other committee members, do take this work very serious. We do label it as being sacred, and we do work, with a sense of urgency.
And of course, it's something that we know other municipalities and governments are keeping an eye on as well. That's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Councilmember Peter Braithwaite and former Councilmember Robin Rue Simmons for joining us.
All right.
Thank you.
The Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act has allowed the Department of Justice to re-examine the cases of more than 150 Black Americans killed during the Civil Rights era. It's a part of a research initiative titled Unresolved, and some findings are on display in a new interactive exhibit at the DuSable Museum. Arts correspondent Angel Ito introduces us to the son of one of those Black Americans who were killed, and shares how the new exhibit is helping him bring closure to his family once and for all.
More than 150 names of people killed during the Civil Rights Movement stand on display in a special exhibit at the DuSable Museum. Their lives were cut short at the hands of race-related killings more than 50 years ago, but the lessons learned from their deaths live on. This interactive exhibit can best be explored through the Unresolved app's guide, walking visitors through each person's story.
More than 100 cases were initially reopened under the Till Act.
The app requires visitors to scan a QR code that can be found next to each name, and that's where their story begins.
Say his name to begin his story.
One of these stories is that of Roman Ducksworth Jr., a military police officer killed at 27 years old in Taylorsville, Mississippi. His son Cordero, who currently resides in Joliet, said he didn't learn of his father's death until he was an adult. He would receive a letter about his father being honored as a civil rights martyr in Alabama.
It was in a state of shock for me because I never knew exactly what happened or why my father wasn't around until my wife showed me that letter. I guess you could say I was betrayed, but at the same time, I understood.
He says his mother never wanted him or his siblings to grow up having hate or resentment toward white people, so she never told them.
In order for her to teach us what she wanted us to know, she had to make that sacrifice.
Cordero's mother would go on to protest with all 6 of her children by walking through the front entrance of her town's stores instead of through the back. Now, when I asked Cordero if he believed his mother ever truly mourned the loss of his father, he recalled that moment in time.
Her healing process was during the time when we were still down there and she was doing the things she was doing to show the world that, I'm not afraid. This is what these people did to me and my family.
But her healing process did come with help along the way.
Medgar Evers was her counsel for the whole incident. That Martin Luther King sent him there because Martin Luther King couldn't come, so he sent Medgar Evers there to help her since he lives there anyway.
Duckworth's case has been closed since 2010, primarily due to Officer Kelly's death and the lack of relevant statutes. Nonetheless, Cordero is still on a mission.
The only thing that I want is the Taylorsville Police Department or even the state of Mississippi to acknowledge that it was not a justified killing. If I can get that, that would make me and my family feel that much better. And I wish I could have got it done before she died. I did what I said to my mother that I was going to try to do.
For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angel Ito.
And the full podcast episode featuring the life of Roman Ducksworth Jr. and Cordero's continued mission to resolve his father's case is on our website. And the installation is scheduled to remain at the DuSable Museum through the end of March. We're back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. From Harry Potter to The Hobbit, there's no shortage of fantasy books for children and young adults, but we don't often see Black characters in those stories. That's one of the reasons why Chicagoan Zetta Elliott created the urban fantasy book series Dragons in a Bag to allow Black children to see themselves on the pages. The latest installment was just released. It's called The Witch's Apprentice. And author Zetta Elliott joins us now. Welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices, and thank you for joining us. Zetta, why did you want to write a series in the fantasy genre specifically?
Well, I grew up reading fantasy fiction. I absolutely loved books like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but there were no little Black girls in Narnia. And I still remember how it felt to be excluded from the stories I loved. It's like loving a book and realizing it doesn't love you back. And I've spent a long time trying to sort of decolonize my imagination and accept that magic can happen to anyone, anywhere. And I just felt that if there was something I could do as a writer to prevent future generations from having to go through the pain of that exclusion, then that's what I was going to do.
And why the emphasis on witches and magic in your writing?
You know, I have a theory that what I am doing is Afro-urban magic. And so some really incredible authors here in Chicago, like Rena Barron, they are reaching back to Africa, drawing on African mythology. And I thought that that was an important gesture, an important move, but it wasn't something necessarily that I would be too good at. There's always that memory of the rupture, right, caused by this history of enslavement. So I don't actually know very much, unfortunately, about Yoruba mythology. I'd have to do a whole lot of research, which I could do. But I thought, what if I took the existing conventions, right? Because when kids think about magic, they think about witches and wizards, but they think about a witch as being someone who has green skin and a pointy black hat and rides around on a broom. And they have this vision of a wizard who has a long white beard. They're basically drawing on European conventions, European folklore. And it's important to me that children realize that every culture has its own magical traditions. So I'm trying to blend African-American mythology. I want my stories to be set in the city. You don't have to be in a castle in England. You certainly don't have to be a British child. Well, magic happens to everyone.
Your child, your character, Jax or Jackson in The Witch's Apprentice, tell us about him briefly and what he's like.
Jackson has a little bit of me in him. All my characters do. He is 9 years old. He unfortunately lost his father in a traffic accident about a year ago. So he's being raised by a single mother, and she has to go to court to fight eviction caused by gentrification in his Brooklyn neighborhood. And so Jax is left in the care of Ma, an elderly Black woman who happens to be a witch. And he desperately wants to prove to her that he is good enough to be her apprentice. He's geography whiz, he's really good at geography, so he recognizes the stamps on the box on her kitchen table, which come from Madagascar. And when he gets curious and wants to know what came to her from Madagascar, he finds out that it's 3 baby dragons that have to be taken to the realm of magic.
Oh boy.
And Jackson's choice is, can he help her get those dragons there? That's the start of the adventure.
Okay, good. I was gonna say, don't give it all away. They gotta read the book if they wanna know more. Now, despite it being a fantasy, you take the opportunity, like you said, you give a little bit of a Black history lessons. For example, Jax tours Bronzeville and Hyde Park. Why did you wanna work that in as well?
Definitely. I think fantasy, again, doesn't have to be an escape. I know some people read books because they want to get away from their everyday reality. For me, fantasy is a way to have a deeper engagement with reality. So I write about the neighborhoods I live in. The first 2 books are set in Brooklyn, and then I moved to Chicago to the South Side. So I definitely wanted to write about the neighborhood. I think fantasy can be a way of giving us fresh eyes of looking at the world. So I hope that kids walk around their neighborhood and say, hey, Jackson Park, the Garden of the Phoenix, that's where Jax, took his own phoenix. And the Forum, that historically in Bronzeville was a really important meeting place for African Americans. So where else would witches hold their annual convention except at the Forum? So it is important to me that, as an immigrant, I see the city, the country sort of through fresh eyes, and I hope I can do the same for kids in the city.
So, you just said it, but I'm going to ask anyway, kids in the city, who is this book for?
Oh, fantasy fiction is for everyone. I was really lucky that Dragons in a Bag was selected as the global read aloud. And it is a really fun book to read aloud as a family. A teacher can read it to their class. I had kids in Nairobi reading the book, kids in Alaska. It was really fantastic. Fantasy fiction is for everyone. Inclusive fantasy fiction opens the door and makes everyone feel welcome. I specifically also hope to reach reluctant readers. When you never get to see yourself reflected in the pages of a book, when you never get to be the hero having the magical adventure, that can diminish your interest in reading. So when I hear about achievement gaps and a problem with literacy, especially with Black boys, I just think, well, what books are you offering them? Because the Black boys I know love to read, especially when they are the star of the story.
Okay, star of the story. I love it. Zetta Elliott, thank you so much for joining us, and congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Up next, a new scholarship aimed at brewing a more inclusive craft beer industry. Beer is intended to be for everyone of drinking age, of course, but it's not always made by everyone. The craft beer industry has historically been dominated by white men. A 2021 survey by the Brewers Association, which represents thousands of breweries nationwide, found more than 93% of brewery owners are white and about 76% are men. That lack of diversity is the inspiration behind a new scholarship initiative in Illinois.
Craft beer has something for everyone, and it's important that that message is pushed forward.
Jay Westbrook is one of 3 winners of a new diversity scholarship created by the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild. The goal is to build a more inclusive industry by giving underrepresented groups access to education and technical training.
Drinking beer together is a way to share a sensory experience, to celebrate life events, to break liquid bread together. But when we looked at the community that craft beer is nurtured, whether it's at beer fests or in tap rooms or on our own production floors, it was pretty clear to us that there was a distinct lack of diversity.
The scholarship is a partnership with the Siebel Institute of Technology, a brewing school in Chicago. It covers either an entry-level or intermediate-level brewing course, a value of up to $4,000. Westbrook has been brewing his own beer for about 2 years now and hopes the new training and knowledge will take his passion to the next level.
I've always had a love and a fascination for craft beer, but once I got into the service industry, I became even more fascinated with how it was made and how it was created.
Westbrook has created 4 beers so far, including Harold's 83 Honey Ale, which you can find at Haymarket Pub and Brewery in Westtown.
Harold's 83 Honey is definitely a hat tip to Harold Washington becoming the first African-American mayor of the city of Chicago back in 1983. It's also a hat tip to Harold Baines, who also had a really good 1983, as I am a White Sox fan. And it's also a hat tip to a Chicago institution in Harold's Chicken.
It's not just about beer for Westbrook. He also wants to inspire other beer makers of color and tell a story with each creation.
For instance, my Summer of '54 project that I did with baseball historian Shakia Taylor told the story of the friendship between Ernie Banks and Minnie Minoso.
That mission to educate and effect change is a big part of why the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild says they chose Westbrook.
he had a lot to say about how he really wants to be like a beacon of diversity and equity and inclusion, and that he wants to use craft beer to affect positive change in the community.
I'm very much a purpose-driven brewer, so there's always going to be a philanthropic aspect to the beers that I brew, as well as a storytelling aspect. I'm very proud of the city that I'm from, and I want to tell stories about my city through craft beer, because the easiest way to get someone's attention, to get them to listen to you, is to put a proper drink in their hand.
And Westbrook's Harold's 83 Honey can also be found at most Chicago area Binny's locations, as well as several liquor stores. The Illinois Craft Brewers Guild says it hopes to award its new diversity scholarship annually. And that's our show for this weekend. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News, including new CDC studies on booster shots and the Omicron variant. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And join me in Paris Schutz next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.